So I've been really intrigued by sort of the title that we have come up with for this session, and that's sort of this comparison between headsets and the smartphone. And I think the reason for that is really because smartphones for us is like, I don't need to elaborate how important they are. Everyone's kind of like keeping them in their pockets, looking at them every 20 minutes or less. If on a scale from 1 to 10, if a smartphone nowadays is sort of a 10 in terms of the importance and the role that it plays in our lives, what number would you guys give it for headsets in the future?
11.
I think it'll be up there. Yeah.
11.
I think in the future, not presently,
Yeah,
but in
absolutely.
the future, 10. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's going to be up there. You said 11.
I did say 11, yeah.
I mean, I could say
absolutely.
12, you know.
I've got 13.
Yeah, 13, yeah. It could be a race to the top, but I think it's important to qualify this. What we mean is we don't imagine that in 10 years, people will be wearing a big, thick headset. We think that will evolve as well, and so you have to start somewhere. It's been starting for the last few years. It's going to get much more advanced. Some of this technology isn't quite there yet, but when it will, I mean, I think it will be as unobtrusive as these glasses, right? And I think that's the kind of the holy grail that we're all pursuing.
Mark.
I agree. My focus at the moment is in the enterprise space. And one of the key things about wearables is you can actually use your hands. Yeah. At the moment, when they're doing any kind of simple operations and they're having to use AR, there's a tablet often or a phone. Well, they have to put that down. Often the cognitive load gets lost as well. So being able to see what you need to see just through, be it glasses, contact lenses, or whatever it will look like in the future is going to make things so much easier.
Brilliant. And I want to ask Kathy as well.
I will definitely say I'm with them, and I'll raise you a 15. But no, I agree. I think it's going to be kind of when you think about the future, it's like that device is going to combine communication and compute in one single device. That means that we don't have to carry our phones and our computers and all these sorts of things, right? So it becomes that one device, and eventually eventually, like you guys mentioned, it could be contact glasses, contact lenses. I do think I want to mention something really funny that we talked about when I worked at Magic Leap. We had something called like the 5-mile rule or the 8-mile rule. Of course, miles, because we were US, when I was there, Magic Leap is a US based company, so we use miles. But we always talked about how if you leave your house in the morning and you leave your phone behind, within a couple of minutes of leaving, you eventually realize I left my phone. You will drive back no matter how far you've gone to get your phone. Like you will not leave your phone unless it's like an emergency. And obviously we're not there with any type of device or any type of, AR, spatial computing device where you would actually go back unless it's absolutely necessary. So eventually we'll get to that point where it's like the 1-mile rule. You'll leave the house, you realize, oh my gosh, I'm not wearing my glasses. I absolutely need to go back and get it. So we're not there yet, but one day it'll be a 15. So
I think that's actually a fascinating point. I like asking these 1 to 10 questions usually at the beginning of the session. There's always someone who goes like above 10. In this case, it's been everyone, and usually there's then someone who is like 9 to provide sort of an alternative answer.
That would be me actually, if I can, if I can just get in here for a second. So actually, I would be. And the reason why I say that is because I think if you take a global perspective on that question, the same like when you have to answer the question, the role that the iPhone plays in different parts of this world today, right? Or the smartphone as in general, not to pick out one brand here. But I really would say that, it's going to be a question of accessibility, affordability, and connectivity. And, that question just will be answered very differently depending on where the globe you are, where you live, where you do business, etc. So I think that's why I would say overall, if I have to give a general answer to a quite broad question, I would land rather below 10.
Really interesting. 1 second. I know that Kevin wants to follow up on that.
Yeah, I mean, just to do a little plug, because it is an economist-led piece of research. But when we heard about affordability and accessibility and those sorts of things, it did make me think we are today also launching a project on Metaverse enabling factors. It's a piece of research. You'll find it in your Economist event app. You go under the exhibitor section under Meta. There's a link. The Economist is leading on this research that's really trying to figure out, to the point that was raised, how do we ensure that countries around the world, not just the ones that are perhaps have higher purchasing power, how do we make sure that all countries are able to participate in the metaverse and benefit from the up to $5 trillion in value that's going to emerge in the next 10 years? So if you want to take a look at the paper, it sets the frame for the research we're going to do this year, which is really, again, trying to measure across different countries, look at the various ingredients that make for metaverse readiness, and really trying to map that out to help guide policymakers and help guide business leaders in their investment decisions. So really important piece of research. I think it fits right into this point of not everybody can afford headsets. How do we get ready for this kind of future? And so we'll take a look at it. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kevin. And yeah, I encourage everyone to have a look at that. It's been really a fantastic work that we've been doing, a collaboration that we've been doing together with Meta. And we're excited to share with you the findings of our preliminary work so far. And that brings me also to a follow-up question on that. And it's probably a little bit of a spoiler here. But when we think about the metaverse, sort of the main images that we have in mind is sort of this sort of 3D world and sort of virtual reality and immersiveness and presence. Is the metaverse all about 3D and VR? Is that, would you confirm that, or would you say, well, there's different ways of accessing it actually?
Yeah, I think the definition is still being determined. And there are many different visions of what the metaverse will be. I think one of the critical questions is, will we have an open metaverse or will we have a series of walled gardens? The jury's still out there as well, but stakeholders are actively engaged in that conversation, and I think that's an important one. But when I speak to lawmakers and policymakers in the US who aren't as familiar with this technology as you might hope at this point, they think often that VR goggles or headset is the metaverse, or they think they played Beat Saber and that was the metaverse. So it's
a good game, though.
It's a great game, but there's more to it, right?
Definitely.
Helping them to understand that an HMD or a pair of glasses is a tool through which you will access something potentially called the metaverse. It's very different from having the device itself be understood as the metaverse. So there's a lot of, this is probably going beyond the scope of your question, but there's a lot of education yet to be done, especially in the US when it comes to understanding what the potential of the metaverse is, what it could look like, what are the tools as opposed to the experience, and how is this all going to take shape?
Interesting. Any further comments on that? Or?
Well, just very quickly, I've been here since 8:30. I've spoken to some amazing person, been asked a question 3 times, and I've had 3 different answers. Right. Okay? In my perspective, and certainly again, going back to the enterprise part, if you're solving business problems, you can call it the metaverse if you want to. It doesn't make any difference, particularly what technology you're using. It's complicated, but if you're solving real business problems, call it whatever you want to. It's absolutely fine, but you're solving real business problems which are making a difference to your organization.
Interesting. And what do you guys think? Because I mean, there's obviously the topic of headsets, and I think Kevin has just mentioned it in part that right now, yes, sure, they are perhaps a little bit larger, but the future of these is that they will become thinner, and we can, as Katie said, I might leave my house and I don't want to leave my headset back at home. And so what is sort of the grand vision of these sets? Is there sort of some goal that we're working towards to? Is there sort of some optimum type of headsets or glasses that we have in mind and we're trying to find a way, or does the development of those work a little bit different? Kevin, maybe you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start, but I mean, I think the point that was raised is that it's not just about the headset, which I think is true. But I mean, I think the ambition, if you will, is to really see the space where the headsets and the kind of smart glasses that we have today kind of converge, right? Where you're going to have the performance of a headset, so you're able to actually enter either an immersive environment or an augmented environment or holographic projections, but in a form factor that actually is going to be quite light, like real glasses that billions of people wear. But that would also be at a price point that is going to be accessible to many people. I think that's the ambition. It's still some years out, but I think you're going to over time see a convergence between these two ends, right? The headset and sort of these glasses. But I think it's also important to point out that, from when we talk about the metaverse, really what we're talking about are these kinds of experiences, right? And so the ability for people, whether it be in an enterprise setting or in a more consumer setting, but to enter into environments where you can have concurrency across millions of people, right, that are doing this at the same time, or thousands of people, let's say in an enterprise context. The ability for people to feel more immersed in a virtual environment, so that you could actually have, let's say, conduct meetings together, even though you're physically not together. And giving people a greater sense of embodiment, like you're actually there, and actually be able to make eye contact or read people's body language. I've done some meetings with my team who are kind of scattered around virtually, and actually there are some things even now you can see in a very rudimentary way that kind of show the potential. If you're looking at people on the screen, just a bunch of boxes, it's hard actually to know if someone's feeling uncomfortable because you're just looking at a bunch of screens. Actually, this is a real example. I was in a meeting, I was about to end the conversation, and I noticed someone was kind of leaning in a kind of awkward way on the team. This was in virtual reality. And it was an indication to me that, the body language suggests that she actually wants to say something, but is hesitant. And I was able to call on her, and sure enough, she actually had something to say. So I think these kinds of new possibilities that are only possible typically in a real world meeting environment are going to be unlocked further when we talk about being embodied in an immersive environment. And those use cases are really exciting too.
Interesting. Kathy, I would like to sort of ask you a question now, and that's, I know your company is called Journey, and I love the name because it kind of tells us about actually much more that goes on with probably some of the people that you work with, sort of the journey from a company that might be operating mostly physical or digitally, but really into something that extends into sort of the metaverse. What do you see are sort of the adoption pathways for businesses that might be within that are sort of doing their first baby steps? Where does it usually start? What are sort of the first things that they try and do? Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so we work with a lot of different companies. So my side of the business is more the virtual studio. So I'm working more with the brands that want to do something virtual. So for example, I helped create the foundational metaverse strategy for Ralph Lauren, worked with Nike really early on in their metaverse voyage, as well as Louis Vuitton. We've worked with Walmart, a lot of different companies that have that eagerness to do something in these virtual spaces, right? But we also work with physical builds. We have an architecture and design firm. So what you have in the type of clients that we see is we have clients over here that are full going into virtual, really interested. Then clients doing physical builds, you're doing things, whether it's TSX, the TSX building in Times Square, whether it's MSG Sphere in Las Vegas. And the big challenge that we have right now, what we're trying to do with these clients is fully merge the virtual and physical touch points right now, because a lot of those things happen in silos. It's really hard to combine them. So I think that's where we're heading in the journey of Journey, is truly finding a way to combine physical and virtual touch points, right? So we have all sorts of clients. I don't think I can describe one single type, because we are so diverse in that sense, having an architecture design firm and virtual studio at the same place, which is not something that a lot of companies can say they do. But yeah, I don't think there's kind of a set goal. I think the big challenge and what most of the clients are wanting to do is merge physical and virtual touch points. I did want to say something about the devices, because I think I really, having done so much work in the fashion industry, any device that we end up putting on our faces eventually for a longer term, a long time, for hours, a device that we're going to be seen in public wearing, has to be rooted in style. The reality is we are going to eventually need to have very stylish glasses, or the device, whatever it looks like, right? It has to be rooted in style. It's what I call the Ray-Ban moment, when you actually have something that you truly want to put on your face because it makes a statement about who you are and the technology that you're using, all those sorts of things, right? So I even though this is kind of an enterprise kind of focus event, I do think it's important to mention the role that fashion and luxury are going to play in creating a device that we're all going to want to wear, that we're not going to want to leave at home, and it has to be rooted in style. So we tend to really focus on, the specs and the hardware, but for the mass consumer, it's going to have to be something that looks good if they're actually going to wear it in the long term.
I would say that's why our smart glasses are with Ray-Ban. But case in point.
Now it all makes sense. Yeah,
I would also add to that
yeah.
point that I think definitely we all love our fashion, and it does make a statement, but also there has to be a certain level of comfort.
Yeah.
You know, as the devices become less bulky, less obtrusive, I think there will be, and obviously the price point needs to come down, but there will be more ubiquitous adoption. I see the future of digital computing as something that is all around us all the time, that we can access, interact with people, have access to information when we need it, take it with us, but that it's not burdensome. It's something that's almost, we don't notice. So I think, you know, Kathy's right that we're going to want to have something that works with our style and works with our lives, but also I think the less obtrusive and the more comfortable the form factor, the more adoption will sort of take off.
Interesting. And I'm thinking specifically, that's something that a few people mentioned earlier in the other hall, and that's about the problem that it solves, right? And if I think about, for example, some of these glasses that might look stylish or might have particular use cases, I'm sitting right now with a big Dell laptop here, having my questions and reading them out. And I would love to have like a pair of like a headset that I could be wearing here, and it gives me the questions, and feels like a very straightforward application that is relevant today. Is it possible to put this sort of like on a timeline for the development of this hardware? Is it?
Well, that use case now is totally doable, even in something called assisted reality. So the difference between assisted and augmented reality. So, you know, basically putting just a tablet on your head is quite often how they talk about the assisted reality stuff. Very simple to do. You know, you could have had that instructions. Yes, you probably wouldn't look that pretty sitting on the stage with slightly bigger glasses, but it's very functional. So you can get the contextual, relevant and timely information to you when you need it. And that's the phrase I often use, contextual, relevant and timely. But yeah, that's doable now. That's not a timeline.
But would it allow us to have, for example, some interactions, for example, with some other people that will be sitting next to me in the room? Is there sort of that interactive?
Yeah, even to a simple thing that it could be a Teams meeting within it. So you're literally using assisted reality stuff now.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And Mark, actually, I wanted to follow up with you on also one of the points that Kathy mentioned earlier, and that's about sort of the companies that are sort of using some of this technology, sort of this journey as she experienced. What do you think, or what do you see are at the moment some of the most interesting applications across industries? Are there any particular cases that you are most excited about?
So there's lots of different use cases. Within the area that I run, we have members like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, ExxonMobil and stuff like that. There are a few key ones that have come out of COVID, so the remote assistance use case. If you're in the factory setting, you know, when we have COVID, you couldn't have as many people there. If something goes wrong, they could call somebody, have an AR call with them, and they can show them exactly what to do. And that was almost like your kind of bread and butter beginning space for AR. And as we see more and more use cases coming in, things like step-by-step guides are very prevalent now. You see them in lots of organizations. The thing I'm looking forward to is a little bit more in the regulated industries, being able to show that the task has been done completely. Correctly. I didn't get my words right. The task has been done correctly. And that way will save lots of money, because at the moment, some of the companies are having to do that task once and then have someone to check it, especially in these highly regulated industries as well. So those kind of use cases that are just helping people, again, with that relevant, timely information to do the task completely, correctly, I'll get it right in a minute, honestly, correctly will make a big difference to companies.
Very interesting. And what do you think are, and that's sort of a question to the general panel, when we think about, again, enterprises that want to adopt these technologies, what do you think are sort of some of the raw materials that need to be put in place? If we were to look at, say, enterprise readiness for adopting some of metaverse-related technologies, what do you guys think is sort of these are the absolute must-haves, say the 3-4 points that you could think about? I'm not sure who wants to go first.
Well, an obvious one is the broadband and high-speed internet.
Right.
So, I mean, we have to be able to connect, and although we're getting better at distributing that, there's still certainly places in the US and around the world that don't have access to high-speed internet. So presently, whether you're talking about enterprise use or personal use, we do have a bit of a divide with the haves and the have-nots. But I think as we get the broadband out there, we will be able to overcome that. So I think it's obvious, but it's a very important factor.
Interesting.
Maybe I can also speak to that topic. So, so I think like the way that we think about how to adopt the possibilities that come with all these new technologies, we actually think in 3 buckets. So when it comes to internal processes, and I think that's actually something that pretty much any enterprise can think about. So how can you use the new technologies to improve your internal processes to become more effective, more efficient, both in terms of, let's say, how fast you can execute tasks, how quality adherent you can be, how cost efficient you can do it. And I think, of course, then the question comes, like, what are the barriers to basically implementing it? That then for this bucket, I think it's about the affordability, the accessibility, and the connectivity. Then if you think about the other 2 buckets, which we typically classify as you can use it for consumer or customer engagement, brand building, etc. Or the other bucket then would be to use it as a sales channel. And of course, this then really depends on also the maturity of your customer or consumer base that you're dealing with. Particularly, of course, differing across industries. We heard about the fashion industry before, of course. This is something that is quite at the forefront from a consumer base being ready, so to say, to also adopt the opportunities of these new technologies. But if you operate in different industries, this might look very different. So also having that perspective of who are your consumers and your customers when you're trying to use it for brand building or to actually sell something is also something to really keep in mind. But I think if you want to start somewhere, I would always recommend to start with the internal processes first. And when I say that, I mean manufacturing, I mean HR, I mean how you meet people, how you recruit people, etc. So I think the opportunities there are endless in that sense, and they should be industry agnostic.
Interesting. And someone else, or?
Well, just quickly, the other thing we see in the enterprise space often is security. And security is quite a big topic. There's lots of different things. It could be anything from getting devices into the infrastructure to the kind of content that's being captured and stuff like that. So definitely another barrier from an enterprise perspective is security.
Interesting. And Sahil, if I could follow up on your point, like you mentioned a few of these buckets, and I think Joanne has mentioned a few as well, with sort of like connectivity and broadband. And I'm wondering, how high is the threshold for a company that might not be a large enterprise, but potentially like a smaller startup, or maybe just like a company that just started out, to be able to develop these capabilities? Are we talking about sort of like a significant investment that needs to be made, or is this something that you think could be easily accessed?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, because sometimes I think it's easier if you start from scratch than when you're trying to move a big tanker into a new direction. So I'm not so sure if so to say, if you start from scratch and you build for purpose, so to say, if you might not even sometimes be cheaper, because being a big enterprise operating across 150 countries, of course, you have a lot of technology already in place. You're somewhat locked in also with some things, right? And it might be sometimes more tricky to do that than if you're a small startup. And also, like, we have 48,000 people working for us. If you're a small startup of 10 people, where maybe everyone has a certain level of tech savviness, and let's say access also previously to these technologies, it might sometimes be easier. So I'm not so sure, if it's definitely if it's an advantage or disadvantage to be small, so to say.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think that's absolutely right. And I think also it's, if you go back to the different pillars we're talking about, and even in the research report where we're talking about availability, affordability, and the relevance and the readiness. I think the readiness piece is indeed, you don't have to be big to do this. In fact, if you look at some of the reports that have come out recently, like, there's Elm Furniture in the US, they are actually kind of replicating, products that they're selling, but in a virtual space, so that people can sort of see what it looks like. They can actually put it in a virtual environment. Those things are not big industrial processes, but it's about medium and small sized businesses being ready to adopt this technology, to experiment with it, and to meet consumers where they increasingly are. So I do think that, in some respects, smaller players actually have kind of a more flexibility to actually meet consumers and people where they are, and so it's fortunately not something that requires a huge kind of capital expenditure, because it is actually all virtual.
Right. Interesting. I would like to give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions. Yes, there's plenty here. Okay, so we have that's great. We have a microphone going around. First, the gentleman over there, then you, and then you and you. Yeah. Please introduce yourself with your name and company if you'd like.
Hi, this is Azi from Aston University. I'm an assistant professor in innovation technology. This has been an amazing conversation. I totally enjoyed it. The thing is, what sort of bothers me, or I can't wrap my head around, is the sort of technology itself. For example, we were talking about the variables, VR headsets, glasses, and everything. My question is that why don't we involve consumers in the process of design? Because we have seen in the past, there are a couple of companies, big names, came into this picture and then they disappeared. The reason was the design failure. People were not ready for all this. And still we have not learned this thing. Still companies are trying to make things and then impose them onto the consumer, those who have to actually use those particular devices. So why don't we involve consumer in the design process, which of course is again the part of digital business designs. So if you could shed some light on that.
Excellent question. Who would like to go
I mean, I'll just say a little thing at the beginning, but I think actually we are. So, I mean, very much, I wouldn't want anyone to think that we're building things in a vacuum and that we hope people will use it. We very much do engage with all sorts of different communities. One might be just a very kind of consumer type community, but we also engage with different communities like the accessibility community to understand if the glasses and the headsets are relevant to them and how they could be even more relevant. We have some partners here today at the summit that are focused on questions of equity and inclusion, and how do we build to include all sorts of different people, not just sort of like the average person in the US, for example. So we do very much think about these things. Perhaps your point is more like these things still feel not as comfortable and not as intuitive as would be ideal. And I think on that point you're absolutely right. But I think that again it just speaks to what we've been talking about, which is that this will be a journey. The Quest Pro out there already is pretty impressive. The Quest 3 will be even more so when it comes out in the fall. But yeah, I mean I don't think we should be saying that this is the end state. There's still a long journey ahead. I would say though that from a computer, like holding a laptop in your lap, for example, or constantly pulling out your phone to read messages and things, that seems actually, if you think about it, counterintuitive. And so what the hope is that when you get something that's more unobtrusive, that's something that you can wear and not have to kind of, to your point, lose your ability to use your hands, I think that's really what we're all aiming for, but I think the ultimate form factor is still some years away.
I wanted to add something because I do think it's important to mention other visions of what this could look like from a design perspective. So for example, there's a startup out of Silicon Valley with two amazing people from Apple that left Apple, amazing designers and business people from Apple. It's a startup called Humane. And Humane's vision of what this wearable could be does not have screens. It's more kind of a wearable that you put on that has AI, has projection, and you project onto your hand. So it's a different vision, right? It is not necessarily, they say the future is not on our heads. That's kind of one of their taglines. So I do think it's important to look at that, the fact that is it only going to be glasses? A lot of us think it will be glasses for a part of the market, but there are other visions, right? That are fully grounded on design, people coming from amazing design backgrounds. So I do urge them, the person that asked the question, also look at Humane and kind of their proposal to what this future wearable could be, because it's also very interesting.
Fascinating. We have a few more questions. First the gentleman here and then the gentleman over there. Yes. Microphone's coming.
Hi. Hello, I'm Bhavesh Pradhan, and I'm from India, and I work with marginalized communities between India and UK. So my question is, when we are designing headsets like this, are we keeping in mind its uses with a larger marginalized population who would otherwise benefit from such technologies? So for example, if we talk about city planning or town planning, and when we talk about participatory planning, then could we see that these kind of technologies adapt to how people would want to plan their own cities? And is there any example for such experiments?
Not sure this is answering quite your question, but I'm beginning to see a trend of different headsets for particular sectors or particular industries. And that's not just the hardware, that's often to do with the software as well. But I'm lucky enough to speak to lots of different hardware providers. There's one actually based in London that's doing some stuff focused on construction. Okay, so the kind of has to have a hard hat and be used in those environments, and comes up with software that's related to that. Medical is another area that I think we'll begin to see more and more focused kind of headset. So I do think there's going to be another trend, or a trend that is the same is based on what kind of problem and what industry or what use case you're trying to do. I think to Kathy's point, we're also going to have ones that are going to be very thin and look beautiful, but maybe have a limited amount of use cases and software, because the battery and just what you'll be able to see in them and stuff like that. So basically there's going to be a trend, I think, to have more focused devices depending on the problem that you're going to need to solve. And I think that's going to be good for the industry. I really do.
There is a current example of city planning. It's not headsets, but it is virtual worlds. So the mayor of London used Minecraft and asked a lot of like young players to come together and help him think through the future designs of what the city could look like. So that obviously had mass appeal because it was Minecraft. A lot more people have access to Minecraft than a headset right now. So that is a real use case for today related to city planning, not headset related, but related to virtual worlds.
And I was just going to say, because I also heard in that question, the question around, the applicability and also, let's say, the value created for marginalized, communities around the world. And I think this is a very important point that is raised there also, because right now we're often very much talking about use cases that play, let's say, in the first world or the second world, the Western world, however you want to call it. But I think the question really is super relevant, or to also really think, inclusivity when it comes to these technologies, not to put biases into place, as we create something new, maybe also leapfrog, some of the mistakes that maybe were done when, developing and implementing a previous new technologies. I think I just don't have an answer to it. I just, wanted to emphasize that I think that's a very important point that is being raised there. It goes a little bit back to the previous question, or the first question of the panel, is it a 10, more or less, it really depends on where you look. And I think we sometimes tend also to, in these conversations, to talk about, very fancy use cases, but I truly believe that technology actually can solve some of the biggest problems in this world that we haven't solved yet. And to really also think that, by design into these technologies, I think is a very timely and very important request.
Brilliant. Yes, the gentleman here, and then you. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. James Fleck, University of Edinburgh. I wanted to refer to the style issue and point out that there's an important factor, which is the malleability of style and consumer behavior. And I remember looking at the first Apple Watch that was out and thinking, nah, that's an ugly looking thing. I'm now on my 5th Apple Watch. What a change. I also wear hearing aids, and what I see is people walking around with very obvious earpods in their ears. Things have changed. And you actually see people with huge, muckle-great earphones on. So I think that, you know, 2 of the panel are already wearing specs. So I think that the challenge isn't actually, excuse me, Kathy, I don't think it's so much the style. I think that will come when the benefits are so clear. I think the real challenge is integrating the technology into the, whatever the device is, so that people then think, wow, I want to have one of those, even if it looks a little bit odd or ugly or whatever.
Interesting. Yeah, I remember when AirPods came out and everyone was making memes about sort of everyone putting toothbrushes in their ear.
Yes, can I speak to that? And no, I agree. It's not only about style, it's also about getting the optics, the compute power in one device. I mean, I come from working in VR hardware, spatial computing hardware. So I don't think I'm only focusing on style. Like, I understand the technical difficulty of getting all this compute power and all these sorts of things into one device. But I do think for a mass market audience, it has to get to a point where, yes, there is utility and the technology is there, but it also has to look good in some ways, right? Because you have to choose something that, you know, you might want to wear from a mass market perspective. And I'm really thinking more of like my kids and like, what would they actually wear? And yeah, like they make really interesting choices. But no, I agree with you in the sense that it's not only about style, it's about utility and technology and getting it all into one device, which is extremely hard. So yeah, I don't want to be that to be misinterpreted that only style matters. So.
Great. We have 2 more questions. I would like to collect your 2 questions, so just for the sake of time.
Does it work? Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you very much for this discussion, very interesting. My name is Natasha Lander, I'm the founder of Believe, based in Switzerland. Thank you for the questions from the 2 gentlemen and the professor in the back as well. What I was just curious and wondering a little bit around, I haven't heard anything around sustainability, especially environmental sustainability in this field. Just to make 2 notes. I mean, the internet itself contributes about 1% of global emissions. E-waste, so solid e-waste, is one of the growing wastes globally. You know, what are your thoughts? Do your companies do anything actively, proactively about this? Love to hear that. And the last one is to you, just about the report. Where can we find that report that you mentioned before?
I'll answer it separately. And the gentleman over there as well, so we can answer both questions.
It's Demonic here since XR Today, right for the publication. The one thing I wanted to touch on, it was the idea of boiling frog theory, which essentially, how do we get all of the different organizations, the different companies to converge on one specific platform in order to show the use cases are effective? And this will help to kind of balance out the rush of investment that we saw and then the pullback of investment that we saw in 2022, especially with a lot of the different headset manufacturers. I wanted to know, like, what kind of approach would the companies, organizations like to take in order to create like a new kind of slow movement towards building the metaverse on a more realistic timeline?
Okay, so sustainability and net zero and stakeholder platform expert. Who would like to answer any?
Well, I mean, just on the sustainability one, I can just do it quickly. I mean, at least speaking for us at Meta, we've been net zero since 2020. And the goal now, the public goal that we've stated is that we want to get our supply chain to be net zero by 2030. And that, of course, includes not just the hardware that we're starting to make in increasing numbers, but also, quite frankly, all the compute power that we're using for our data centers. All of it is, is net zero. We're turning a lot to clean energy sources to power the data centers. And so that has been, and we're using a lot of like solar, et cetera, for a lot of uses. And so that is actually a record we're actually pretty proud of. But no doubt, I think as a sector generally, as computing increases, as we embark on a new generation of computing, it's going to be the case that it's going to require more energy. And so I think, yeah, we definitely need to all think about doing our part to ensure that it is ultimately sustainable.
And the e-waste?
I'm sorry?
E-waste, electronic waste?
Yes. So again, our hardware, we are taking a very kind of sustainable approach. We are recycling a lot of the products we're making and all the materials that we're using. So like those are definitely things that are included. And you can actually find it. I don't know the exact site. It's probably something like meta.com/sustainability. But we actually issue an annual report where you can actually see all the different initiatives we're engaged in and sort of how we are trying to be very sustainable in our efforts.
And would anyone like to answer the gentleman's question? Is there any thoughts on?
Yeah, just quickly, because we're
We
almost
have
out of time. But there are a number of efforts going on which you may or may not be aware of. World Economic Forum, the Metaverse Standards Forum, and they proliferated over the last couple of years, really, that are taking a look at that question of how are the major stakeholders going to come together and create sort of a common vision. Those processes have been ongoing for more than a year now. Still answering some of the basic questions, but those are the most important. They're the foundational questions. So I do think that we'll see some progress in the next year or so.
Brilliant. Okay, well,
Can I say one last little?
15 seconds.
I was just want to say, I also want to clarify though, the end state is not, I think maybe you suggested that everybody would have the same headset, for example. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. It's more interoperability and making sure that the architecture is open.
Yes.
So that different companies, different players can be part of a broader ecosystem.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. Please thank our speakers.